Welcome again to the Think Fitness Life podcast, mindset, exercise, and nutrition. We are three personal trainers and health coaches dedicated to providing information in these realms to promote critical thinking and assist you in your life practice. My name is Matt Gluckman, and as always with me are my co-hosts Eric Menchie and Mike Urso. We bring contrasting perspectives and viewpoints on the same topic that we like to talk about for an episode. We look at the psychology, the science, the behavior, and how it can shape your fitness lifestyle. So take a listen as we peel back the onion, fall down the rabbit hole, and we hope that we can help guide people along their journey as they continue to strengthen their body, mind, and spirit. And this week, we're going to be talking about peak flow states and the triggers that play into it, and some other examples from famous people, other people who are high performing individuals and who have mastered getting into and staying in flow state. Before we dive into that, I want to hear what Menchie has for news this week.
Have you guys heard of this time signature algorithm? So apparently scientists have developed a way to test circadian rhythms. Have you guys heard of this time signature algorithm?
No.
So it's studying blood work, and it's basically studying your genes and what time of day they're more active through it, and you can kind of tell what kind of person you are, circadian rhythm. Like, are you a night person, morning person? I know there's 4 different categories that they have for circadian rhythm people. We don't have to dive into that, but it was interesting that they finally kind of made a way to test it. I don't really think it's going to help people. I mean, it is, but it isn't, because we kind of all run off this 9 to 5 kind of work life. Unless you're one of these people that, hey, you know that you're a night person and you want to work night shifts.
Yeah, some people just kind of know. I feel, I mean, it's good to have the science to validate or be able to gauge and give us some evidence, of what we actually are. But I feel like a lot of people already know. Like for me, I'm definitely not a nighttime person. I like to get up at the ass crack of dawn and get moving at like 5, 6 a.m. I just get more done. I don't like sleeping in. If I sleep in, I feel like just very sluggish through my morning. But it's really interesting. I when I had heard about circadian rhythm, I had learned at Equinox actually from Dr. Jennifer Martin, who was a clinical sleep psychologist at the UCLA School of Medicine, and she talked about circadian rhythm. And there wasn't there I don't remember recalling that there were different like archetypes of it. But she talked a lot about how light exposure, the misuse of melatonin for as a sleep aid, and there was just some really interesting stuff. We don't have to go down the rabbit hole of that stuff, but long story short, light exposure was one of the best ways to essentially like turn your circadian clock, or I should say calibrate your circadian clock to like the proper wake up time and proper sleep time. And apparently everybody's can be adjusted, but I do remember her saying that everybody was kind of has like a biological predisposition, I guess. Yeah, which kind of goes to what Eric's saying with this new science.
That would help people, like with timing of, you know, certain meals, their circadian rhythm. Like, some people I've heard, if they're, I mean, we're not going to dive into there. So you guys should check out I think there's 4 different archetypes of it. It's like a wolf, a lion, and I think there's 2 other, but it kind of goes in, if you're a certain kind of person, like, what time is the best time for you to have coffee in the day, or what time is the best time for you to have carbs in the day. And I think there's a lot of good stuff behind it, especially with the light exposure. I mean, that's huge.
But yeah, it is pretty interesting because I remember watching this video, and it's Sachin Panda, and they talk about. I mean, the title of the video is a little misleading because they cover so many different topics. But he talks about the circadian clock, but then he talks about the master clock. it's the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and it's set and regulated, like Mike was saying, by light. And the interesting thing is that it needs a certain amount of light. So the amount of light that we are exposed to, say, in the winters in Boston as you're headed to work, it's not even enough light to accurately
Hmm.
turn all this clock on, or wake yourself up actually. um, Between the fluorescence and your lamp and your phone, it's actually not enough light to stimulate that clock. Like you do need, um, they have it measured out in the amount of, like, I forget what unit they use to measure the amount of light level they were talking about, but it did have to do more so with the sun. That obviously was going to turn your clock on. But I thought it was fascinating because, um, and I don't know if
Mhm.
this will play a role into your article and have different archetypes or whatever, but it talks about how many different clocks there really are. Like one for the best time for making new mitochondria, one for best time for your body to react to oxygen, to stimulate your metabolism, to help with dealing with damaged cells. So he's like basically talking about how all these clocks run on differently, separate from the master clock, and how your habits and stuff like that could play a role into either these clocks working appropriately. And the analogy he used was like a traffic jam. Like if these clocks work appropriately, you have smooth moving traffic, you don't have any accidents, you don't have any traffic jams. But if these clocks are off, you got to think of like the lights being off in like a four-way intersection. You're going to have traffic jams, you're going to have accidents. It's pretty interesting the way he was talking about it. So I'm gonna link that video in the notes of this podcast too.
Yeah, he's big into like leading research of sleep and circadian rhythm, which is great. He's a great resource to check out, especially with the sunlight, because you know when we're looking at a screen right now, like on a laptop or a phone, like that's just bad light. That doesn't help. It's huge. It's a
Oh,
huge player.
you gotta get Flux.
Yeah. Oh, I have that. Oh yeah.
Got download Flux. Yeah, I got Flux on my laptop. That's really beneficial. For those who don't know what Flux is, it's essentially an application
Yeah.
you can and iPhone does have it, by the way. It's called what's it called? It's Night Shift, I believe. And it'll turn like amber and get rid of the blue light. But Flux is essentially an application that, dependent upon the time of day, it will adjust your
Yeah.
screen as it becomes more dark
Well,
outside.
the
So if
hard
there's less sunlight outside, it actually your screen becomes less and less blue light. It's really cool.
Yeah, the one for Android is called Twilight. I use that and I have it set to like 7 p.m. And like 5 a.m. because that's when I'm up. But it'll basically, right, turn away the blue light, because blue light in and of itself can suppress serotonin release or serotonin production. And
Yeah.
some people are. Yeah. It's tough because it's everywhere. The blue light. It's hard to get away from.
yeah, but you should. But in this video, um, at least for the clocks, for for going to sleep, yeah, it is hard to like shut off because you're still alert and you're not producing serotonin, melatonin, right? Because you have receptors in your eye that are reading this blue light, and it helps you stay awake or prevent you from falling asleep accurately.
Yeah, and Jennifer Martin, who I had just spoken about too, they did a study at I think it was UCLA School of Medicine. It was probably about like 10 years ago or so, maybe 8 to 10 years ago, on melatonin. And a lot of people take it as a sleep aid, which is completely wrong. It actually doesn't improve your sleep or at all. They did double blind studies with it, and it showed that it did nothing to improve sleep. What it is supposed to be used for is because, like you said, the body produces its own melatonin. What you could do is if that melatonin is being produced at the wrong time of when you're supposed to drop into your sleep cycle, or start that that sleep phase of your circadian rhythm, melatonin can help with people for jet lag, or people who are traveling through time zones, or people who work a job like a doctor who may work like a crazy shifts throughout the month, and then they need to reset their circadian rhythm. Melatonin is used for that purpose. It's to be taken um, before you go to bed to basically recalibrate your circadian clock and your melatonin production for your sleepful period throughout the night. And so that's really what it's used for. It's not going to help you sleep. It's going to set your clock essentially.
So most people are getting like too much melatonin if they're trying to take this every night and trying to sleep. That's bad.
Oh
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And most of it too, it's been, supplement companies will do anything to make a dime off of it. Most of them, they're putting like, tryptophan in it and all these other different types of quote unquote sleep compounds. And
Yeah.
they're selling it as, this sleep aid, but really it's a misuse of the actual drug.
Well, the other thing too with melatonin is it's not FDA regulated, so there's no telling what the actual active dosage is per pill. So you could really, that's why you might experience times where it works amazingly and you fall right to sleep, and it works
Yeah.
kind of adverse effects and it kind of stimulates you and you're awake because each pill
Buyer
is
beware.
quite frankly a
Yeah.
different dosage of active ingredient what you're looking for in there. So yeah, wouldn't really recommend melatonin. Yeah, yeah. Um, cool. That is a really interesting article, and I want you to send that to me not only so I can add it into the show notes, but I want to look into it a little further. That's pretty cool. Um, but yeah, let's get into some peak
Let's flow into it.
flows. Oh man, let's flow into it. Well, I do want to bring up before we dive into it and hear what you guys are going to bring up. I got to listen to um, the School of Greatness by Lewis Howes, and he had Tony Hawk on there, and he had Kobe Bryant on there, and it was really cool to listen to these guys. First of all, really, really both humble humans, like they're just really good individuals and good people. A lot of what they were talking about that was similar was that confidence plays a huge role into how you're going to perform when you're in that flow state and how you're going to maintain that flow state. um, I think one of the contrasting things that maybe Kobe mentioned but Tony Hawk didn't really talk about, and maybe he meant to and just didn't, was that the hours and hours and hours that he spends not in the game, right? So he's looking at his game tape and he's looking at the smallest detail and he's pausing every single thing. And when he has the ball and he's looking at every little detail and breaking down every single aspect of the game, he talks about how that translates into almost slowing down the game in real time when he's in that flow state and being able to kind of make those better game time decisions and make that better game time performance because of all of his hours spent um, before the game, or practicing essentially. um, so I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, we should even before we get into it is just define what a flow state is. And if I had to put a definition to it, and I'm cheating because I found one that I felt would be most appropriate. But a flow state essentially is an effortless state when you lose track of time and you become lost in the activity. And that's pretty much it. Like simply said, it's just, you're completely unaware of kind of, your surroundings. Your existence is like temporarily suspended, I guess, in a way. And your identity, or I'm sorry, your identity, essentially just like disappears from your consciousness. So there's zero ego, right? And most of these,
There's zero like analyzing of anything.
yeah, everything just is a natural flow and chain of events, and with
Yeah.
little to no resistance. As books and self-help books get into the science of it, and it wasn't until I think, well, that book Flow that came out by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, where he actually, it was more of like a self-help book than it was written like a science book. because he talked a lot about like how most of these flow states occur spontaneously with some of these like super highly skilled athletes like Kobe Bryant and like Tony Hawk. And it's really interesting. They said, well, they most of the time they occur spontaneously, but if these people are able to achieve these types of states on a regular basis at such a high level on like a consistent night after night, like Kobe Bryant, when you're scoring 40, 50, 60 points in a game, no doubt you have to be in a flow state. There is a high level of skill that's involved, and there's a high challenge that's placed in front of you. And so, like we talked about before we started recording, that's where flow kind of lands, is like that high level of challenge with the high level of skill. And Matt, you were kind of just talking about like, or maybe it was Eric, about the learning, or no, it was Matt, about studying like the tapes and film. That's all stimulation, which like requires that kind of, that's challenging in itself because you're seeing things for the first time, you're trying to analyze them, but there's not a whole lot of skill involved in that learning process. And that's kind of like that stimulation where you now start to put the pieces together of what you're seeing on the video and then make it like you can materialize it into actually like a physical application of that. That's when it turns into kind of a flow state. And so that's just like, you know, we talked about like the Rise for Superman prior, and that's where these extreme athletes are in this flow state all the time because they are doing highly skilled types of activities and with a high degree of challenge that are very death defying a lot of times. And I would think that to do activities like that, you would have to be in a flow state to do these death defying type of physical activities.
Yeah, because it says once they get into flow, I think it was the Rise of Superman, that like fear just goes out the window, and they don't, and most people just don't even have a sense of it, and they're just going through it so like they're in concentration, but it's just like it's effortless, like you said. And I think a lot
Yeah,
of yeah, and I think a lot of athletes probably live there when they're
yeah.
playing a
There's no
game
anxiety
or these high
whatsoever. You
intense,
know.
you know, whether it's like these X Games where it's extreme sports, or even look at a football. I would say some of those players are probably close to it. I think it's just you. Have you guys ever experienced or gotten to a flow state that you can remember?
Yeah, I would say sports for sure have always done that. Yeah, so I can remember a very specific experience, which was I was playing an intramural basketball game, and it was just one of those days where everything was going my way. Like I was seeing things before they happen. I was driving, and it was like everything around me was happening in slow motion in a way, and I was just like like we talked about, like it just flies by, and
Mm,
it like hours can go by and it feels like minutes. Like it's just it's one of those things where like there's just zero resistance. Like you feel zero resistance about with the activity that you're doing. And I just remember this one basketball game where I was like, nobody can touch me. Like I could drive at will, I could shoot, and I'm hitting every shot, and I'm just zeroed in. And it was like I had to really rise my game up because it was people I'd never played with before. They don't know me, I don't know them, so everybody's trying a little bit harder to kind of prove themselves. I had a decent level of skill with basketball, with a high level of challenge, and so it just when those two things meshed in the perfect like um, uh, blend of the two, I was just locked in, and it was just like it's like a feeling of
yeah,
like being untouchable.
yeah,
It's the ultimate
it
high.
really
It's the
is.
ultimate high. Yeah, it's the ultimate high. It's like you feel literally like Superman. Like you feel like nothing can stop me right now. And eventually that comes to a screeching halt at some point, but you relish in it in that moment. And then you wonder sometimes like why how can I not like how can I do that activity
Yeah,
again and I don't get the same result? Like You know, I think about this sometimes, guys. Like, you ever like if you have like 5 workouts in a week, and a lot of times like you have like 3 okay workouts, like you feel kind of middle of the road. One, you're like you feel like crap. You're like, gosh, I don't even want to be here. Like I'm just dragging. And then you have one workout that you just feel like totally locked in. The weight's super light. You know, the bars flying off the ground. Like, you're just totally zeroed in. Nothing. Just totally locked in. I get that with my strength training workouts. I would say, if I'm looking at one activity where it happens more than anything, like a strength training workout, and I think it's because of my experience, because I'm willing to put like a challenge in front of myself, whether that be trying to get through the workout in more of a rapid fashion, like just circuits or whatever it is, and that I have a high level of skill in it because I've been doing it for a decade. I get into a flow state probably working out on a regular basis more than any other activity.
Yeah, because in the book it said about the flow state working out, and then I started thinking like how I I think I get into it, but I don't think I go like as flow as I would when I used to play football or like a high intense
Mm,
sport. But I look
yeah,
back and I can
I
still
think
think like some movements I've gotten into it, or there's been some workouts where I've dipped into that flow and gone in and out, and it
yeah,
is it's I don't know how to explain it. It's just like this euphoria of you're kind of on top of the world for a second, and then you come back down, like back to reality.
yeah. Well, the runner's high.
I think a lot of people miss out on getting into a flow state because of a couple reasons. And listening to Kobe Bryant and Tony Hawk, kind of one of the things that they talked about was also like enjoyment and loving what they do. And like in the end of the day, they loved skateboarding, they loved basketball. They absolutely just had an innate passion and desire to perform for those. And the other thing that was common across the board for them that I think prevents people from finding flow on their own is failures. I mean, the way that these guys talked about it, Tony Hawk was trying for the 900 for 10 years. And he said there was a point when he did it and his balance was off and he went forward and broke his ribs. And then later in the X Games, he like knew he's like, I know I can do this. Like, and but the way they
Yeah.
talked about their failures and they
Right.
looked at them and learned from them was like they were excited. They like literally thinking like, oh man, it's exciting when I fail because of the opportunity it presents to me of growth, individual growth and learning. And I I I don't hear people talk about failure like that. I hear people say, yeah, even at the best level that I hear is just, I'm not afraid to fail. I can fail and learn from it and pick myself back up. But these people were excited to fail. They looked forward to failing because in their failures were their greatest strengths or their greatest strides. And um
Yeah, it is a weird feeling when you get into it and you're like, because then I'm sure there's other games you didn't have it.
yeah, and is it like no sense of self? So imagine like you're able to just perform. So the task level matches the skill level. There's a clear goal and a way to progress through, and
Right.
you lose
Right.
sense of
Yeah,
yourself. You're so embodied in what you're doing that you basically lose a sense of yourself, but you have total like physical perception, awareness, and you're just performing at the highest functioning possible,
Mm,
being the animal that you are essentially.
because in the book, and it kind of goes on what you touch on about like having, that mindset is it goes into fixed and growth mindset. And I know we've talked about this in the past, but it basically said like if you're a fixed mindset person, flow is going to be very hard for you to achieve because you kind of have this sense of like, hey, I know what I'm doing in life, but you're not like pushing the limits or stretching past that. And then
right.
you're almost not you're focusing on the outcome rather than like the process of deck to get there. And people who more obtain these flow states, aka like Tony Hawk, Kobe Bryant, some of these high end athletes, they're all these growth who just like have these clear goals and then just they go through the process over and over again. I think like Mike was going to say, what do you say about running and the runner's high?
Yeah, runner's high.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and just pushing the like a marathon could it's going to suck, but you're probably pushing the limits of physiology and your capacity. Like I'm sure you're going to get to in a flow state eventually. Some people,
Yeah. Yeah, and there's this curve I feel like that happens too. And if you think like we've talked about this in the past, which is like you've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable
yeah,
and you've got to challenge yourself to do hard things. And if you look at like back at past discussions we've had where we talked about, the mental the mindset and having a strong mindset by pushing yourself to do uncomfortable things. And then we kind of talk about, the brain and the neuroscience of learning and how when you learn you build these new connections and these new connections are wired and fired together, and then when you memorize things they wire even stronger and maintain those connections. But like any new activity that you start or any new type of um, uh, anything that you do that is challenging creates anxiety at first if you have a low level of skill. So I'll use the example of like me just starting jujitsu, right? It's a highly challenging activity, and I have a very low skill in it. So you kind of worry a little bit. You have a little anxiety. I wasn't like super worried about it, but like you do anything that you're about to dive into
of
that you
course.
have little to no experience with creates a little bit of like a wonder. Like I wouldn't say it's quite excitement. Excitement is probably the positive version of anxiety. This is more of like you're just concerned, like what's going to happen, am I going to get hurt?
Am I
But
going to get
then
beat? All that
yeah, but
stuff.
then
Yeah,
right, but then as you develop more skills, right, that challenge still maintains that heightened level. But you as you develop more skills, then you're stimulated a little more, right? You start to learn, you start to develop. And then that anxiety shifts into just being like stimulated and excited about it. And then like as your skills continue to develop, like I've already had like I had one sparring session where I'm not very like skilled, but I was more skilled than the person I was up against. I was a little more experienced than him, and I was in a total flow state for that whole 6 minute roll where it was a high challenge because he was 35 pounds more than me, less experience, so my skill level was higher, and so I was just in a total flow state, like dominating it. And I think I made him tap 2 times in 6 minutes, which I felt like unstoppable. Now I get into a position where I'm now rolling with a brown belt or a black belt. My skill set doesn't offset with the other person very well. And so I'm back to anxiety again, like, oh my God, am I going to get caught? Am I going to get choked out? Am I going to get hurt? So there is this kind of, I feel like, curve that happens where we go like from anxiousness to excitement and then we get into that flow state finally. But it all starts with that anxiety. And sometimes people aren't even willing to put themselves in that place to make a challenge hard enough.
yeah.
Do you
It's
know what I
that
mean?
fine line.
Hmm.
But I think you're right about that exact example because, um, I mean, it, the environmental factors are
Yeah.
such that, um, you are kind of forced into a flow state, right? Like you don't have like unless you're sparring and you're saying like, all right, we're only going to go like 70%, we're going to go 50%, we're just drilling, whatever.
Nope.
But when it's live
Yeah.
drill, like I remember in wrestling practice, it was basically a flow. Essentially, when you're matched up with somebody who's an equal skill level, it's like you weren't sitting there thinking, okay, so to do a single leg, I'm gonna drive my knee down here, and then I'm gonna reach for that leg. Like, no, you are just going, and nothing.
No, you don't know what time it is. You know how much time ran off the clock. And that round, 6 minutes, if we just sat here and set a timer for 6 minutes and stare at the clock and watch the clock tick down, it would feel like eternity. But when you're sparring like that, or you're wrestling, or you're out in the middle of a like the first 6 minutes of your run when you first start off feel like crap. You're like, oh my God, like this first like half mile feels horrible. But then you get into like your body's warmed up, you start your skill levels increases because now your brain is starting to fire a little bit better with like the proprioception that your body's like taking in. And then all of a sudden, boom, that next 6 minutes goes by and it felt like 3 minutes. You know what I mean? And so it's like you lose track of like time and space completely when you're in that state.
It's basically like you only have the mental capacity. And I think of like a UFC fighter, maybe even Less so boxing, because I feel like boxing can get to those tactical points where you can kind of think and break down your fight, maybe. But then I've never boxed, so I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But I look at the UFC fighters as like they literally only have
Do you know
enough
why?
mental capacity to
You know why? Why that
perform, to
happens?
be at that performance flow state of,
No.
if this dude throws a punch at me, I need to duck. You know what I mean? There's no cognitive thinking. There's no awareness. There's just literally performance. It's game time, and I think that's because of because of the triggers that you're in that force you to get to flow.
Yeah, so when you get in flow state, it actually decreases the prefrontal cortex. So you hit it right there, like the high memory, the high cognitive functions, that like shuts off. It's called transient hypofrontality. So it's basically the inaction of that, and which lets the brain talk to its other spots freely, and like that's where you start getting into that higher state of peak performance, because you're not worried about these cognitive over anxious things about time, space, other people, like are they stronger, not stronger. It's just kind of like you got to do this and figure this out, and can you stay there?
I think a lot of people are afraid to try to perform at that level. I think they're afraid to try to compete, and I think it does stem from a fear of failure, a fear of um, some people. Honestly, it can be literally a fear of succeeding. I don't know. There's a lot of deep psychological reasons of why someone would fear success, but um,
Well, it's more of a fear of failure, I think, than it is success. I don't think people are worried about succeeding.
Well, I think, well, with success comes great work, and the possibility of great failures. That's how I would think.
yeah, well, there is actually deep psychological reasons why someone would be afraid to succeed, but it does stem kind of, it does, a portion of it does stem back to a fear of failure. But you just don't see people pushing themselves to that degree. You don't see people striving for flow. I mean, I think about how I walk around the gym and how I want to start making T-shirts that say like, my outfit doesn't match because I came here to work out, and like my shirt's all sweaty and tattered because I came here to work out. Like I don't know. I feel like
Yeah.
as a whole, I don't see a lot of people pushing themselves to find that flow state. Like I love going to my pickup soccer because I feel like everybody is just trying to play and flow, and they don't care about,
Yeah.
like, yeah, we do care about being kind of tactical, but we're not super technical. We're not super even if we are competitive, we know that we're competing really with ourselves, and we're just seeing if we can sprint down and get that ball right after running, forward. Like it's really about a physical workout and allowing people to get into that flow state. But again, I just don't feel like a lot of people seek that flow. So
Well, there's not a lot of people who totally engross themselves into one singular activity. I think it's about like creating solitude, you know, 100%. How many times can you get into a flow state when you're meditating? A lot, like if you can really lock in. Yeah, and it's about
kind of goes back to meditating a little bit, right? Like so many people are so good at distracting.
and that's what it comes down to. Yeah, that's what people really do. So many people have like ADD, and this is we talked about this in the past. Like everybody, not everybody, but a majority of people have these issues, and they get a self help book, and then they get another self help book, and another one, right? And they're like waiting for their like the light bulb to go off. When instead, if you just focused on that one self-help book, put it into practice, repeated it over and over, you would probably see better results with that one self-help book that you decided to just, go down the rabbit hole with. Yeah, as opposed to like reading like five or six different ones. Really quick too, something that Mihai said in his TED talk, which I thought was really interesting, was like basically like people's minds, like this psychologist had found that people's minds can only like basically like pay attention to a certain amount of information at a time.
Actually
So that
use,
number is
yeah.
essentially around 110
Mhm.
bits of information per second. So that's, if you think about like just listening to me talk is taking about 60 bits of information per second. That means that we really can only focus on maybe two people talking at the same time maximum, and beyond that we lose comprehension of being able to absorb that information. And think about how often that people talk about, oh, I'm a really good multitasker, I do this really well. Are those people really that effective at the activities they're doing, if they're trying to do all these different things at once, as opposed to the person who can lock into that one activity and just go 100% into it? um this is, go ahead.
I want to bring up some data points to help support, like, you guys told me, and again, I love doing these podcasts because I learn when I do my research, and when I learn when I get to talk to you guys. But so Stephen Kotler, and you guys said he was the author of um, a certain book about.
The Rise of Superman.
Okay, yeah, Rise of Superman. So Stephen Kotler wrote the Rise of Superman. He is a flow specialist, and he's a psychologist. He studies flow states, and one of the studies that he came out with, and I'll put some information that will guide you to his resources in the notes as well. Um, just writing that down right now. But one of the things that one of the studies he showed was that top end executives are about 500% more productive when in a flow state. People learn 200 to 500% faster when in a flow state, and then creativity is boosted by about 700% in a flow state. So those are reasons why you'd want to find and maintain a flow state, um, because I feel like that's maybe one area we kind of didn't touch up on yet, about what okay, so why do I care about flow state, you know what I mean? So I think that's really important to bring up.
Yeah. Well, I think, and we should talk about, as we, get closer to the end here after our discussion, about how to achieve it, because I think that we have, I think there's a recipe for it, and I think we could talk about that a little bit. I mean, I've got some, more anecdotal evidence from just my own experience on, just having this conversation is making me think about other times I was in flow state that weren't physical activity based, but like just writing, like, saying I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write a blog post, or I'm going to do this work project, and minimizing or eliminating any distractions in my environment was one of the best ways for me to forcefully put myself into a flow state, which is like, shutting my phone off or turning the ringer off completely on do not disturb, going in, like isolating myself away from everything, and having zero amount of external distractions that can potentially get me off course. I've had some of my best moments writing, where the pen just flows along the paper, and then work projects, for example, going to solitude, not even looking at the clock, putting my phone away, and just cranking out work without even really thinking about checking Facebook or Instagram notifications, or those are some of our best
Yeah.
moments. And I think, like, as we get further down here, that's the antidote to getting into a flow state. And at the ultimately, what Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's book, Flow, is about, is how we can create and find our own happiness through this process.
Yeah, because once you get into that flow state, like everything else just
Yeah,
falls into place, and you how do you put it? It's not like you open, a package and you get a piece of material thing and like you're happy for like 20 minutes. You know, it's more this like euphoria of like how can I get this again? And I just felt like my best
right.
work was done in that 20 minutes. I felt that I could accomplish all that, or teach, or whatever I could do to create other people, and maybe it's to find your happiness and then maybe other people's happiness. Because you ever heard of some musical
Yeah,
artists, like when they get on stage they get in flow, and then they're like, well, I'm creating happiness for other people, which drives my happiness, and they're like in a complete
yeah,
flow state for the whole like 3 hours
exactly.
or whatever
Yeah,
they're playing. And I think you hit it on the head with the cell phones and stuff, as they say the attention robbers is the biggest thing that like gets people out of flow, like these
Yeah.
distractions or
And
being disrupted
yeah.
or checking
And what about
Facebook or
like
checking Instagram
timelessness?
or
Like
whatever.
just being not worrying about, because we talk about like if depression is worrying about what happened in the past and anxiety is about what worrying about what may happen in the future, true happiness then lies in the present moment, right? And so being focused on the present moment and
Mhm.
having a sense of timelessness is really what allows like just those hours to seem like just minutes where we can just get into that state, things just keep rolling, and we don't even have a sense of time. And I think if we can focus on, you always hear that saying, "Stop and smell the roses." Well, I think there's some merit to that. You know what I mean? Because a lot of times our minds are going to, oh my God, this happened in the past. What if it happens again? Or that a whole, what's going to happen? The whole anxiety thing. I think we do need to find ourselves just kind of locked into the activity that we're doing in that moment and not worry because you know like Joe Dispenza was talking about, when we wake up in the morning and we look at our phone and we jump on Facebook, we're immediately focused on the past or going into the past. These are already things that have happened. These are, everything that
Yeah.
we're viewing at that moment is everything that's behind us from a time sense. And so we immediately start engaging in the past as opposed to thinking about, how about I just enjoy the smell of my coffee while it's brewing? How many times have people done that? You know what I mean? Just stop and like, wow, that's that aroma. Like enjoy what is it right in front of you. You can be in a flow state just in your morning routine if you can just be more mindful in those moments.
Yeah. And I guess when you're in those states too, and then, I don't know, Mike, have you ever
Yeah.
had, or Matt, like anxiety in a flow state? So when I've had it, or not anxiety, but like a threatening thought that comes in, it just comes and goes. It's like not even a threat
Yeah.
to your brain. Like I've been in states where, something will come up or,
Yeah,
someone's on the field
Yeah,
threaten me, and it's just like
it's
your
like it's
body
just
just
a
knows
blip
what to
on the
do and
radar. Like
gets
it's
around
like
it and like
comes and
keeps
goes. And I
going.
think part of that is because we're
Yeah.
at that moment, we're so confident in our skills that they are gonna um essentially like, be able to hold up to the task that we're performing. You know what I mean? So like we just feel like we're adequate. Like we have the goods. And I think that that's why that anxiety comes in and it goes right out because of that confidence in our skill.
And then the body just functions effortlessly. Like it just can't be said enough. Like you're doing stuff you're not even thinking
Right.
about, s- stuff that you've trained and practiced
Right.
all the time, and
And
it's
that's
just
about developing,
you just
like you
snap a
said, that
finger and
high
it does
level of
it.
skill at that activity that you're performing. Like we go back to, Tony Hawk nailing that 900. Like, do you remember that when that happened? Do you guys remember
yeah,
that?
Steve.
I mean, that was like, what is going on? Like, how did a
Oh
human
yeah.
being do that? And
Oh yeah.
he looked like it was
Insane.
so effortless. You know what I mean? Like, and that's another thing too. When you're in a flow state, things just come like you just have this sense of relaxation on your face too. Like there's no strain, there's no resistance. It's just calm, cool, and just effective. And yeah.
But then a couple weeks later, someone beat it. Someone did another 900. And now
Oh,
it's
it's incredible.
now with these extreme sports, they're getting to like
Yeah.
1080s, 1260s. Like that just opened the door to
And there he talked about how
Right.
limitlessness on this thing,
there was
because
absolutely
it's amazing
no
now. Like
sense of
900s are
doubt in his
nothing.
mind whatsoever. Well, it's kind of like when the first person to beat like, the 6 minute
And
mile
find
and
that.
then the 5 minute mile and
Yeah.
the 4 minute mile, and now they're trying to beat a record for the marathon, and someone just beat a record for
Right.
the fastest marathon, and yeah, like they just keep. It's like once it's broken for humanity, it's like that next person who's that runner up, like Michael Phelps breaking all these records, and whoever was under behind him, I forget the exact name, but it's like they see more of the possibility. Like no longer is doubt in their head that it's possible, because it is possible. It's just whether they're going to be the ones to do it or not.
But now, would you guys say now stuff like the marathon where you're pushing limits? Would you say that's different than like a Usain Bolt sprint? Because he's got natural speed and talent where you're not really pushing limits. You're more just like a flat out speed. Would you think that has a role in it? Why some people haven't been able to beat Michael Phelps just because he was just so fast and so good, rather than like a marathon or a 900 where you're actually pushing a limit where you have to know.
Well, if we're gonna look at like the exact thing like that, I think That was the first year they were using different suits that wouldn't hold on to much water, and it was the first year that they used a pool where they cut off the corners. So instead of the water flow reverberating back onto the swimmer, it would just kind of dissipate away from the pool. Um,
No, I know, but what I'm saying is more like that's not really like pushing the limit. I mean, it is, but is it enough time to actually stay in a flow state where um, like the mile is just so long and you're just pushing? Maybe Mike can explain it.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, Eric. Well, so here's why I refer to it. I think that if you guys heard of the central governor theory, um, central governor theory is essentially like we have like a physiological like limitation. You know what I mean? That like for
Yeah.
example, in a 100-meter sprint, right? Most of these sprinters get up to max speed probably around like 50, 60
oh,
meters, and then they actually start to
question.
slow down for like the last, I don't know, 10, 20 meters of the race. Well, central governor theory basically says like we have a physiological like limitation on when like our our essentially our engine, our heart, it's going to rev up, but then it's going to max out, and eventually like there's we don't have any bearing on when that is, so that could be predetermined by genetics. But I also think that there's a ability of a human being when trained properly to override that system and be able to push beyond the pain barrier or beyond the um, yeah, because I said essentially like what it is, it's pain. That's all lactic buildup in a sprint, for example, that you have to be able to bear the pain that's actually slowing you down. It's not actually that you're slowing down. It's
Mm.
like it just hurts so bad that you have to slow down. And so maybe it is more about the psychological part of it versus the physiological part of it. And those who can rise to the top and overcome, and like the Usain Bolts who can outrun everybody, not only do they have a high level of physiological type of like superiority, but they also have trained themselves psychologically to be able to overcome the pain and override essentially that central governor system. That's what I would say.
I think it's kind of back to having a why. I think a lot of people don't have a why. I mean, you talk about listen to these guys, Tony Hawk and Kobe Bryant. They have a why, and I was actually sitting around with a couple of friends the other day, just kind of BSing about just soccer stuff and life in general, and we were like kind of joking about how like
Yeah,
when you're tired, you're dead tired, and you're just like every sprint hurts and every run hurts. But then like when you get the ball and then you lose the ball and you have to get back on defense because it's your mistake. For some reason, at that point, it's like it doesn't matter what's happening. You don't want to let your team down. You don't want to like get the blame and feel bad that you just caused this play that break down. That you will just sprint all out without even thinking. You'll just go. So I do think it kind of comes back to a why, because these guys just they're innately designed to want to get better at something, to want to practice, to want to put in the probably had to do a lot with their upbringing. They probably had great parents and great role models in their life, but they want that reward of being able to put in 12 hours and executing for one, and being able to perform at the highest level and being a champion. And I think of like a bow hunter, kind of like the art of that. Like I'm talking to this one of my buddies out here, and he spent years just practicing to shoot the bow, years saving up money, getting all his gear, and then he had to get a special tag that he can only get every 5 years. And he's at the age where in the next 5 years, when he gets it again, he's probably not going to be in
yeah,
the best condition physically to go after these elk. But the reward that innately instills in you, he's absolutely in a flow state when he's stalking these elk and he's mapping. They
yeah,
can't make a single sound. They have to make sure they're in the perfect position for the wind, or if it smells them, it'll just run off. Like he is absolutely in a flow state, just performing,
yeah.
crawling, and then just pulling up
That's
that
rough.
bow and knocking it and ready to
You know,
fire. like that sort of that why, like he has an innate why
Yeah,
of why he
that
wants to
burning
perform at
passion
that
too to
level,
like just
and why he
keep
wants to
going.
put
Yeah.
that type of stress and I wouldn't say anxiety, but stress on his system. And same thing for peak
Drives him
performers
more.
of Kobe Bryant and Tony Hawk. Like they
Yeah.
have an innate why already built in. Right. Like it doesn't matter if they fail because first of all, they're not even thinking about their failures, but that doesn't even matter to them because if it does, it's just awesome, right? They look at it as an opportunity to just get it, and it's a stepping stone to then get it. Like Tony Hawk hit the 900, but it took him 10 years to hit it and land it and not break a rib cage, you know. So I don't know, just that level of perseverance, that dedication, that discipline, it's not common. It's absolutely not common.
There's another interesting phenomenon that I just thought about, which is, so there's three sports I can think of that have this same type of trend that happens often. It's baseball, it's basketball, and it's hockey. And mostly because of the playoffs on all of those sports are like multiple game series that they play each other, right? And so let's take like basketball for example. You may have like a game one, game two conference finals, and like, the Warriors just like blow out the Cavs, right? But then all of a sudden game three rolls around, and you're like, well, obviously the Warriors were so much better than the Cavs these first two games. They're clearly the better team, but then all of a sudden they just stink on that game three, and the Cavs facing like, a deep hole, just turn it on, and the whole team is in a complete flow state, and you just know that they're going to win that game from the very start. Like they hit every shot, they can't miss. They're blocking shots defensively, and the whole team gets into that kind of flow state. And so I wonder sometimes, like, is the flow state like contagious in a team sport like that? Like, can it be um kind of like a yawn, can be like, if someone in the room yawns, you end up yawning. Like, can it be caught? You know what I mean? Like, is there a transference
Ooh.
of energy, you know what I mean, amongst the team? Yeah, where everything's clicking, and is it an energy state that's going on in the dugout or on the sideline or, in the box? Like, what is it where you see these teams just absolutely dominate
Like
another team
everyone's
that
on the
just
same
blew them
page
out
and
the night
just
before?
yeah.
Like, there's something to that. You know what I mean?
So, so I want to get into the science real quick before we shut this down. So Stephen Kotler talks about social triggers
Hmm.
in a group
Yeah,
flow, and the example was being in a fourth
that's
quarter
interesting.
like deficit, having to come back from it, and the kind of the
Yeah.
commonalities were serious concentration, shared goals, good communication. So that's your immediate feedback, equal participation by all parties. Um, the risk is already kind of established, whether it's physical or
Yep.
mental, and it's probably a loss, right? Like everybody on the team knows that the risk is we could just fucking lose if we don't get this shit together. Yeah, right. Blending egos, sense of control, close listening, and additive interaction. So because they do go into the social aspect of group flow states. But then some of the other stuff they talked about psychological triggers and environmental triggers. Real quick, I'll jump into those real quick. Psychological triggers were and how to attain flow. Whereas one, challenge level matching skill level, which we talked about. Clear goals in progress, right? Like, all right, I'm gonna try to win and I'm gonna try to score as many points as possible. Immediate feedback, but the best example was like playing a musical instrument and playing a song. So you want to pick a song that matches your skill level. You have a clear goal in progress, right? You're trying to play the song, you're trying to learn the song. And the immediate feedback is obviously just messing up and missing a chord. Some of the environmental factors they
Hmm.
use an example for was a snowboarder. So you have one. The number one is a rich environment. It's complex. It's novel. So a snowboarder's looking down like a double black diamond that it's performance day, it's Olympics, so it's novel. They haven't seen this exact slope and this exact conditions too often to make
Yeah,
it not novel anymore. It's
it's
complex,
interesting.
obviously it's difficult. There's a high risk, right? If they fall, they lose in the Olympics. Or in the example they used was like a what's it called when the snow's coming down the mountain? Avalanche. There's an avalanche. You're obviously going to be in a forced to perform, and then deep physical awareness and deep embodiment in what they're doing. So those kind of stuck out to me when he was listing how to attain
Right.
flow, because it made sense to me when I was thinking of examples of high performing athletes in their field. Um, so yeah, he seems like a really good resource on um, peak flow states and how to attain them. And I think we kind of explained why somebody would want to get into these flow states. And kind of back to the anecdotal evidence, like I loved how you said you just kind of um, not lose sense of time, but you make sure there's no time barriers on yourself, Mike. Because one of the things that I realized I do myself just by recording this podcast with you guys today is I was like, oh, no wonder I'm always
Right.
like the hardest things I have to do, or like not, I wouldn't say the hardest, but maybe the more challenging things I have to do, or the more important things I have to do, I always set it at a time where I don't have anything later like immediately going on, right? So I give myself like 4 to 5 hours just so I don't have that worry of will I get into a time constraint later, because I like when I get into that flow, I like to finish what I'm doing with that flow. It bugs me if I'm in a flow state and I'm like I only get halfway done something and then I have to like finish it another time. It never comes out the same way, in my opinion. And now I'm realizing it's because I get into those flow states, because I sort of allow myself to get that deep embodiment, because I'm eliminating all the external distractions.
Well, there's actually this flow condition questionnaire, an FCQ, and there's seven flow conditions that have been proposed. Yeah, and so the 7 flow conditions, we kind of already talked about some of them, but the 7th one is freedom from distractions. That's one of the conditions that needs to happen to be in a flow state. Another one, Matt, you talked about is like knowing where to go, like navigation. So 1 through 7 there, knowing what to do, knowing how to do it, knowing how well you are doing. So you have to have some level of self-awareness as well, right? Knowing where to go, right? If there's navigation
Nice.
involved, you have to have a high perceived
I'm gonna put
challenge.
that in the
You have to
show
have a
notes
high
for
perceived
anybody listening.
skill, and then you have to have freedom from distractions. And those are the conditions of being in a flow state. And it's really interesting because I think the freedom from distractions it's really different than all the other seven,
Huh.
the other six that are in those conditions. And I think that one is probably the one that if I was to say people who want to get and tap into this flow state better, that's most of the time we know what to
Feedback,
do, we
right?
know how to
Okay,
do
okay.
it, we decently know how well we're doing, or somebody's giving us feedback at least. um, Generally we know where to go, we know if something's challenging enough, and we also know where we fall on that skill spectrum for the most part, is because as soon as we get involved we know we're either going to suck or we're going to be good at it. It's that freedom from distractions, that's that one condition that most people struggle with, I would say, in finding that flow state in just their everyday life. Like, just people who are on here who are not even talking about getting into a flow state when you work out or if you're playing recreational sports. Some people may not be into sports at all, they may just be going to their job and want to do their job better, you know what I mean, and work on that project. And so really it's like that freedom from distractions, turning off your phone, turning off your notifications, isolating yourself from other people who could potentially disrupt you, or take you away from your work, so that when you do end up coming back you just don't feel like you're still in that state anymore. And so this is why I think, have you guys heard of the Pomodoro technique for getting work done, where you set your clock for, and there's so many variations of it. I typically do 25 minutes, you set your clock, you don't do anything but work for those 25 minutes, and then you take a 5-minute break, and then you go back to your work for another 25. So you do your work in 25-minute blocks, but it's
Yeah.
uninterrupted, distraction free type of work. And I found I do a lot
Great.
of really good work in those types of formats. And so it's just another way to kind of tap into that flow state. But It's just really interesting. I find that one condition of freedom from distractions is the one that sticks out like a sore thumb to me. That's the limiting factor for most people.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many distraction
Yeah.
nowadays. That's
Oh,
the
so
problem.
you took the words out of my mouth. Let me tell you. So this is one thing that has, and we talk about bridging flow state with essentially ultimate happiness. I was as at a point where my kids, they were younger, but their kids are starving for attention, especially from their parents, especially from the adults in their life who are their the main people in their life. And I was at a point where I was so engulfed in work and texting and doing all this, and I was on my phone when I'm with my kids. My kids are, they're just fighting with each other just to get my attention, not because they want to fight, but they just want me to react and pay attention. And so it came to a point where if I just put my phone down, like what could be more important than actually spending time with them in this moment? So I put my phone down. Now, if I go outside, we have a trampoline. If I go jump on the trampoline or take them to the playground, my phone stays inside. I don't even bring it. And I don't want the distraction. And I can tell you with 100% certainty that my happiness factor has risen like 5,000% simply because I am present in that moment with them. And I'm in a total flow state of joy and happiness when I'm just bouncing on a trampoline, laughing, being like stupid, silly, it's just singing, dancing, you know what I mean? Like it is just the ultimate level of happiness. And part of it is because I'm checking all the boxes on what these conditions are. Do you know what I mean? And it's just like when you eliminate those distractions, especially as a parent, there is so much more joy that can come out of that experience. And I mean, the way your kids perceive that, it's just, it just intensifies the love in your life. And man, that to me, thank you for bringing that up and let me speak on it, because that is just such an important part of my life and a lesson that I've learned as a parent, but also just as an adult that I try to take into other things I do in my life, just with my work. When I'm working out, I don't answer my phone or text messages on during my workout. My music plays in the background. I lift. I try not to talk to anybody, and I'm so much more effective. I'm totally in that flow state. It's just those little things, man. It's the distractions, really.
No, I completely, yeah, I completely agree. Um, and I guess to help our listeners, how do you go about planning around that? Because you have kids. It's
Well, I'm busy, but also it's not just about like being a good parent. It's also about just your relationships in general. I think that not to go too deep here, but just how many times have you been with like a significant other or spouse, and you're texting on your phone and they're talking to you, and you're still texting or looking at something on your phone, and then they're like, "Hey, are you listening?" Like, you know, and you're distracted when all you have to do is like put down your phone and talk to them and just give them your 100% attention. um it's such an easy thing to do, but yet we are just, we talked about this in past podcasts. There's so much that can socially distract us. There's so much noise out there. It's really hard to filter it out.
Yeah. And so don't fall victim to your excuses or your circumstances or your situation, because there's a way. Where there's a will, there's a way. And you just heard somebody who's a high performing individual, two kids, starting, or I mean working on a major startup company, that's not just starting up, it's executed. But you probably have the busiest schedule out of all three of us, in my opinion. So um, I agree about the unplugging and putting away your phone, but unfortunately, that's really easy for me to do, and for some people, they can't do it because of um, needed responsibilities with on call, for whether they're a doctor, whether they're a business owner, or whether they're have 4 kids and a baby, whatever it may be. But I think actually one piece of technology that I can get behind, because I feel like I'm a person that believes less is more, but I feel like if used appropriately, those Apple Watches or the smartwatches can actually be pretty effective tool at helping people unplug. For those individuals who are maybe executives or doctors or whatever, you got emails and texts coming in 24/7. They're not all going to be important. They need to handle right away. So I like when I've seen people use it as a way to streamline, just to kind of like get a quick look. Okay, it's not important. Get a quick look. Oh shit, I got to take this right now, and help people kind of sort out and get out of their face diving into their phone 24/7.
I need to. Yeah. Wow, that's interesting, Matt. Though I'm just going to oppose what you said in a way. So so let me go. I used to have.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. I was bringing up for that one scenario that somebody is already just glued to their phone. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna give you my personal experience with the Apple Watch because I had the Apple Watch when it first came out. I wore it for the first couple years, and I got rid of it. I stopped wearing it, and I stopped wearing it for that exact reason because I was being notified too much. And even though I wasn't pulling my phone out of my pocket and spending time reading through an entire message or email, I was still glancing at my watch like every few seconds because it taps you, it notifies you, and so it was just a distraction. And I got to a point where I was just, you know, I was I would be in a conversation and if my wrist was like vibrating me, I would look at it and I just got to a point where I was like, there's nothing that's that important that I need to disrupt this conversation or look uninterested when I'm talking to somebody that I need to answer this right now. And especially when it came to like spending time with my kids. Because it could be like you may see it and it's going to prompt you to then pull out your watch. It's just a trigger to me, or it just acted like a trigger to me to like the greater evil of what the iPhone and the social suck of all of that can do to you. And so for me, I actually had the opposite effect. I could see how it may be good for people who are just heavy into their computer and phone and they need to scale back to maybe a less notifying, type of technology. But for me, I got rid of it and I stopped wearing it. I just wear a regular digital watch that has 3 numbers on it and a second hand, and that's pretty much it. You know what I mean? I don't want to know what's going on anymore because, and you just got done saying I may be one of the busiest out of all three of us. I still find a way and I'm happier because when I do check my phone, it's purposeful, it's for a set amount of time, and then I put it away and I don't look at it for a while. You know what I mean? And so I've programmed and conditioned myself to do it in a more manageable and way that allows me to not disrupt my everyday life and my everyday relationships.
And I was just offering advice for those who feel it is their personal truth, right? Back to um, Neil deGrasse Tyson, that their personal truth is that they are so busy and they have to be responsible for every incoming email or call potentially. And there can be emergencies that they will have to drop all things about their life at that given point in time and handle whatever's been put at their table. Not every.
So, yeah, some people's identity, like some people actually attach their part of their identity to being in contact with people all the time and having to be in an open line of communication at all times. And I was like that, and I just found that I stopped once I got rid of the ego and stopped worrying about what is having other people's when an email comes into you, it's essentially somebody disrupting your life. Do you know what I mean? It's essentially what it is. Like somebody disrupting your yeah. Yeah. So yes. Yep. Yeah, for sure. And I think it's one of those things, man, where people should just try it out. Digital detox for a while. See how you feel. See if it changes how happy you are for a week. Turn off Facebook and Instagram, get off of it, don't look at it for a week, and tell me you don't feel a little bit happier, in a different way. And you're because you're no longer fulfilling your happiness with external factors.
I don't even bring my phone with me when I work out. Like I don't want music. I want to be able to find my flow state without music. I want to just kind of not have any distractions. And
Yeah.
one thing that we started doing was more for health reasons of the brain waves and stuff like that is we unplug our router at night and then plug it back in the morning. And it doesn't make any difference to me unplugging. Like my phone will still um, be
Yeah.
plugged in when I get
Just
home
have
and
to
sitting right at
be in
my
suspense.
bedside table with the alarm ready to go in the morning. But we will shut off the Wi-Fi at night, and there's some evidence out there about it disrupting REM cycles. But yeah, I agree with you. Like small little challenge, like this week when you get home, put your phone someplace else and just hang out with whoever's at home. I like that. Well, I think that kind of wraps up flow for this week. Next week we'll be talking about something more nutrition related because we haven't done that in a while, um, and we will decide what that will be. And you'll just have to stay tuned. um, Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But yeah, for those who want to get more information, we're Think Fitness Life. We have a Facebook group, we have a YouTube channel coming soon, and we have a new website coming soon. But go ahead and send us some comments, write us an email. We'd love to hear your feedback. Love always hearing from our listeners directly because just gives us better feedback and helps us be better um, podcast hosts for you guys. So that's all for this week. Take care.